Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is another Design Cuts live session, and I'm thrilled to welcome back our good friend, Anna Aspnes, for what session is this, Anna?
We are doing, the number of sessions. Yeah, it's been a few now. I think we're not quite into, we're not into double digits yet, but we're getting there.
Well, welcome back. What are you going to be sharing with the wonderful Design Cutters today?
I am going to be doing a sort of word art type design that would be really good for either a card or just a small print. If you wanted to put something on your desk or on your wall, or even print it on a mug or something like that. So I think it's got an appeal to a wide array of digital artists.
Love that. And we were talking before we just went live here, but something a bit different. I don't think we've done a kind of predominantly text-based live session before, so I'm really intrigued actually.
Yeah, there are no photos in this session.
Yeah.
Which is shocking.
No, I love it. Really looking forward to it. But Anna, over to you. I can't wait for this.
Yeah, sounds good. This is the design that we're going to be recreating. I thought it'd be fun just to look at some of the layers before we go ahead and recreate this. And I'm using the Gentle Morning collection that's currently one of the bundles, one of my mini bundles over at Design Cuts at the moment. But we're going to create a 6x6 design. Typically I create it 12x12, but that's the beauty of Photoshop, is that you can create in any size that you want. We're going to build sort of a foundation. I'll go ahead and I'll just show you the different layers. So we're going to use one of the digital papers as our foundation and add in an artsy transfer to create a focal point. And then we have 3 different word art techniques that I want to focus on. There's this one, and then a secondary one, and a tertiary one, which is going to be fun. That adds some dimension to the piece and creates a focal point. And then we are going to embellish it using elements from the ArtPlay palette and from the Multimedia Elements, and then add in some light to finish the design. So that's going to be kind of what we're working on. I'm going to, are we good? And so we're going to be using, I'll show you the different digital art supplies that we're going to be using. So we've got the ArtPlay palette Gentle Morning, which is a variety of papers and elements, transfers and overlays. And those are kind of like transparencies and rub-ons if you are a traditional scrapbooker. And then we have the artsy transfers, and these coordinate with the ArtPlay palette collection, and they are delivered in the Photoshop PSD format. And the beauty of these over the transfers and overlays that you see in the ArtPlay palette are that these ones in the ArtPlay palette are delivered in .png format. So they're a single layer format, whereas the artsy transfers, they are delivered in multi-layer format. And you'll see that when I pull this one into place on our design. So we also have this Rise Word Art that I'm going to be using in conjunction with the type tool that's available in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. And then these Multimedia Elements, these work in a lot the same way as the artsy transfers, in that they are an element that is saved in PSD format so that you can access the individual pieces to each of these element clusters. So you can use them together independently. You can build your own, and I'm kind of introduce you to that idea as we work throughout the session. And then finally, some fun sun sketches. So these, I don't believe we're actually using in this collection, but they kind of go really well, and we might just pull one in to the mix. So to begin, I am going to go ahead and create a new layout. And I mentioned previously that I work typically in 12x12, and that is the typical scrapbooking size. Some people work at 8.5 by 11, a more rectangular format. But for this session, because I'm working on more of a card or a small print style design, I'm going to create it at 6 inches width, 6 inches height. You always want to make sure you have a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. This is going to ensure the best print quality when you actually take your finished art piece and upload it for print at your favorite printing company. So I'm going to create that. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the design in its entirety. And then I'm going to navigate to the papery part or the papery file of the art by palette. And if I just make that a little bit larger, you can see that we have 4 different artsy paper designs. And then we also have these solid paper designs, which are designed to coordinate with either the artsy transfers or the transfers and overlays that come with the art by palette. Those are the PNG files that I just showed you. In this case, I'm going to drag my paper into my workspace directly from the folder location. You can also go to File, Open, and navigate to the paper and import it through Photoshop as well. And then with the Move tool selected from the Tools panel, I'm going to click down onto that paper, drag, and then release that left mouse button to drag that paper into position. Now we have a choice at this point whether we want to actually keep this paper in its original size. You can move it around, of course. You also have the option of using the transform controls. If I hover my cursor over the corner of that paper, you get this arced, diagonal double-faced, double-ended arrow. And if I click and drag, this allows you then to resize that paper if you want to do that too, if you want to include more of the design in the mix here. In this case, I'm simply just going to drag it onto my page design like this. And one of the beauties of having the original card design open is that I can kind of just see as a reference roughly where I had that paper positioned. So the next step is to create a focal point. We kind of have a little bit of visual interest happening here on the paper design, but I want to introduce more. So now I'm going to navigate back to my digital art supplies and access the artsy transfers. These are delivered in 3 different zip files, 3 different folders. I have just copied and pasted the different elements into one folder just so I can view them better. So these are different previews so that you can see what each of the PSD files include. And I know I want to use this one here. So I'm going to click and drag it into my workspace. Now it's really important here that you drag it into your workspace so that you can access all of the different layers that are available to you. If I went ahead and dragged this file directly onto my canvas, then you'll see that we end up with just one single file. And the beauty of having these different individual layers is that when I go ahead and click on that first layer, click on the last layer, holding down that shift button, you can see I can highlight all of those layers. And then I'm just going to unselect that auto select option. And with the Move tool, move that onto our layout design. And we're going to need to resize these just so that we can have this design sort of exist fully on our page.
That's such
like
a beautiful, like, mixed media textured piece that you have there. It's really, really stunning, Anna.
Texture is my favorite thing. So the beauty of this, the beauty of this is that you can play around with the different layers. So if I wanted to get rid of that paper texture layer, you were talking about the texture. If I wanted to move it around, if I wanted to rotate it or resize it, I can do that without affecting all of the other layers in the layout design. So any of these layers can be manipulated, recolored, rotated, resized to create a multitude of different options. So that's the beauty of these artsy transfer layers. I'm a bit of a fan. So I just want to make sure that we have it. I think maybe I need it just a little bit smaller. So I can go ahead and just reselect those. This is our foundation. This is the design piece that we're going to work with to incorporate our word art or our text effects. And I've got 3 different word art approaches for you. And we're going to be using clipping masks, blending modes, and layer styles. So technique number 1 includes resizing, rotating, and using the clipping mask. And to do this, we're going to navigate to our art supplies, to the Rise word art. And here I want to incorporate this Rise and Shine word art. Now I can go ahead and drag this directly onto my canvas if I want to, or I can pull it into the background and then move it onto my canvas. And I'm actually just going to make this just a little bit larger and then go ahead and rotate it. So again, I'm using those transform controls. And so with the move tool selected and the show transform controls, if you're working in Photoshop Elements, that will be show the bounding box. You want to have that box checked so that you can see this dotted box that goes around the art element. And then this allows us with our cursor to, I showed you the resizing it, making it larger or smaller, or rotating it, and gives you lots of flexibility then for placement. So I'm going to place it about there, and then I want to reorder these layers by dragging that word art layer down the layers panel and depositing it directly above our background layer, but below our artsy transfer layers. And we've got a lot of artsy transfer layers. So I'm going to select the first layer, hold down that shift key again and select them all, and then go layer, group layers. And then that's going to nicely organize those layers just so we're not dealing with so many layers in our layers panel. And then from here, I am going to go and select one of those fancy artsy papers that I showed you previously. So remember, we have our artsy papers and we have our plain papers. So I want to use some of the great color and texture and design that's happening within this piece. And so I'm going to drag that directly onto my canvas and go to layer, create clipping mask. Just to kind of just note here, you'll notice that when I drag the paper directly onto the canvas, I have Photoshop set up so that it resizes to fit that canvas. If I want to use the paper in its original size, I can drag it into the background, and then with that move tool selected, drag it onto my canvas. So notice this paper is much larger than this one underneath. So, and it really just comes down to personal preference. And you'll see why. If I go to layer, create clipping mask, and now move this around, you can see that that design is going to colorize our text. So I quite like the look of that. If I go ahead and do the same thing with that other layer that I imported, then we're going to get the same effect, but obviously the design is much larger, and so it's going to vary slightly. But this just adds some visual interest into the piece. So I quite like that look there. And that's kind of the first part of the design. I'm wondering if in the previous one, it's so impossible to get the same look twice.
That's part of the beauty of it.
It is. So I'm just going to go with it and not keep going back to my original design, and we can kind of compare the differences at the end. So you can essentially, to kind of just backtrack, you can use pre-existing artwork or word art designs, and you can import the artsy papers. You can also and then clip them to that word art design. You can also use the layers from the artsy transfers and the transfers and overlays as well, and then add those into your clipping set mix. So that's another kind of bonus technique for you. Don't just kind of limit yourself to the artsy papers. Think about all the different elements that you could potentially clip to this word art piece here. So our word art technique number 2 is to duplicate and use the clipping mask with blending mode. So we're going to take this clipping mask function just a little bit further. And so I'm going to place a quote from the same word art collection into that white space on my design. And I think I use this one. So I'm going to drag this one into my workspace. And this one I can drag directly onto my design, and it's gone a little bit smaller. And because I had the paper layer selected, then it's imported that quote underneath those artsy transfer layers. So I need to click and drag those and reposition them so that they exist on top of that design like that. So that creates another sort of nice area of interest within that white space. And then to colorize this particular word art element, I'm going to duplicate one of the layers in our artsy transfer. I'm going to do that by clicking on this brown paint layer and dragging it down to the new layer icon in the layers panel. If you're working in elements, that will be located at the top of your panel. And then I'm going to drag this up to the top of the layer stack so that it sits directly above the word art layer. And then I'm going to go to layer, create clipping mask. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts too. I just like to use the actual command. So notice now how we can just add a little bit of variation into that word art by just clipping a different layer to it. And again, you could use the paper layer, you could use one of the transfers and overlays that's in the ArtPlay palette as well. And once you have created the clipping set, then you can change the blending mode of the text layer if you want to. So you want to make sure that you have the word art layer selected. If you select the clipped layer, then it's really just going to affect that layer, and we're just going to see the black text underneath. So the effect isn't very good. If we go ahead and select the actual word art layer, then when we apply the blending mode to the word art layer, it's going to affect all those layers clipped in that clipping set. So now I'm going to go up to the top of my layers panel where this normal bar is. So the default blending mode for any layer is normal. And then when you click on that, you have all of these different options. And notice as I hover my cursor over those different options, then we're going to get different effects. So these are all the darken blending modes, and then these are all of the lighting ones, which is why we've got a slightly different effect. And I want to go with, I think, hard light. So you can see here now that we've now got some variation, and we can go ahead and we can change the placement of that transfer to adjust how it interacts with the word art and the blending mode.
I love the level of control that it gives you, Anna.
Yeah, it's
very,
really
very
flexible.
Cool.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were still with me. You were very quiet.
I am. I'm going on mute while I listen to you, so that you don't get any background noise from my side. But I'm watching intently. And
yeah, I think even if you're not interested in photography, I mean, a lot of my customer base are photo artists, so they're not scrapbookers, but they elevate photos using my artistry. But I think any sort of graphic design, because these are just really kind of elevated artistic pieces delivered in digital format that have this drag and drop approach. And it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, but with a lot more flexibility, because there are no rules as to which piece needs to go where. You know, obviously helps if you know a few design principles, but it's the way I have designed my products to make it as easy for people as possible to just drag and drop them into position.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always amazed actually by your compositions, because you seem to pack so much in, yet they never feel cluttered. They always feel balanced, and you're just a real true master of composition in my eyes.
Lots of studying of design principles. And I teach that too. So it's not like I keep it all to myself. I do a lot of teaching these days. And
you're very open, in fact, with sharing your knowledge.
Yeah. Okay, so technique number 3 is basically using the type tool. So we're introducing one of the tools that is already existing within Photoshop, and we're going to now combine that with some of the digital art supplies and some of the clipping mask and the blending modes. And this time we're also going to use layer styles. So you're going to select that type tool from the tools panel, and then you're going to type in a word of your choice. And in this case, to me, it made sense to add the word sun. And of course, because I wasn't paying attention to where I had my cursor, then this sun word is now kind of become part of our clipping set. So I'm just going to drag this sort of out of that clipping set, and I want to make sure it's at the top of my panel. And now you can see it. It's too small. So we're going to use that same move tool with the transform controls to make that much larger. And then I'm going to sort of place it between these two elements. And I'm just going to rotate it slightly just to give it a little bit of visual interest. And we're working with a very organic design here with lots of curves. There aren't too many straight lines other than the edges of our canvas. So I want to make sure I support that design ethos by continuing with that trend. So I'm going to accept the transformation by clicking on that check mark, and not loving the font that I have that has been defaulted into my design. So with that selected, I'm going to go up to with the type tool selected. So you can see now, as I'm accessing all of the different fonts that I have available to me and I'm hovering over them, then it gives me a preview of what that font is going to look like in the word that I have typed. And I actually chose Alba. I'm going to find it. I guess I've gone past it. Here we go. Alba Super was the one that I decided to go with. And I chose this because, of course, it's got lots of curves which emulate the curves that are in my design. I really liked how the tail sort of scooped down at the bottom here. It sort of dips down along and aligns with the artistry in the artsy transfer. And it's also got this fun white space in the middle. So that was the one that I decided to go with. It's kind of fun too. It adds an element of tension into the mix because it's not a font that necessarily matches the artistry, but it adds a little bit of playfulness, I think, into the mix. So that was the reason that Anna, I chose this font.
You're actually from the UK yourself.
I am.
Originally.
Yes.
And I have to report, I'll give you an update. The other day, I was pretty sure for a moment I saw this glowing yellow orb in the sky for a few moments, and then it disappeared, and I haven't seen it again since.
Well, that's so funny, because in Colorado, we've literally had 4 days of rain. And
it's the same here. It's so terrible.
What, isn't it 365 days of rain?
Yeah, I think something like that. And then what happens is we get sun for about 15 minutes. We all run out with our tops off, get sunburn, and then retreat back inside when the rain restarts. That's pretty much it.
I know. People get depressed after 3 days of rain here in Colorado.
I'm not surprised.
Everyone's done. It's so funny. Okay, so we have this is our kind of what I call our word art foundation, onto which we're going to add all of the different effects. So I'm actually going to reuse that artsy paper number 1, which we used previously to clip to in our first word art technique. Now, I could go back to my files, but just to make it easy on myself, I am going to just duplicate the layer. And I might, duplicate the layer like that. I was just worried that this was part of the clipping set, but it's not. It's part of the artsy transfer. So once I've duplicated that layer, I can just drag it directly up to the top of my layers panel, as opposed to having to go back into my files. And again, I can resize this element if I want to, make it smaller. You could also crop it if you wanted to, and then go to layer, create clipping mask. So now I can apply this really fun design to my title. I don't know if I even want it small. So if you don't like what you've done, the beauty of Photoshop is it has the undo button, and you can go ahead and use that. So I'm going to clip that down and sort of just leave it like that. And you can move it around, and then you can start thinking about different effects that you can apply. So one of the things that I like to do is, because this is our kind of focal point, we're making it the focal point of our design on our foundation, I want it to stand out a little bit more. And right now it doesn't stand out very well. So one way we can do this is by duplicating the paper layer a couple of times and then applying different blending modes to those layers. So for example, I might decide that I want to add a multiply blending mode or a color burn blending mode, a linear burn. Any of these kind of darkened blending modes would be a good option. In this case, I'm going to go with multiply. And then you can also adjust the effect slightly by altering this opacity slider. So as I bring the slider to the left, you'll notice the percentage value decrease. And that is going to lessen the effect of the blending mode that we have applied. And then you can add in the second layer and maybe add in a different blending mode. So I really like how the color burn intensifies the colors. So you can then bring in that and really customize the colors and the contrast in your papers. So this is much darker now, but I feel like it still needs a little bit more texture in order to make it pop off the page. And so this is where layer styles become really useful. And I should also say too that you can also apply these layer style effects to any of the word art that you have available to you as well. So these wooden elements and these text files, these word art files would also be a great place to use these different effects. So I'm going to reselect that sun word, and then I'm going to go to layer style, and then you'll notice all of these different layer style options. So the first one that I want to play with is this Bevel and Emboss. So it's going to add in some default settings that have already been applied. Sometimes it will add in the settings that you applied previously to a previous project. And then it's just a matter of playing around with these different settings. So I have an inner bevel and smooth. I usually keep those as default. And then you can play around with the depth. The depth is obviously going to make this look like it's kind of more dimensional. So I'm going to bring this up maybe to about 438. And then you can also play with the size. I usually leave the direction the way it is. So notice how the size now also increases the size of that. So you can move the slider, or you can go ahead and you can select that pixel value and then just enter the number on your keyboard. So in this case, I'm going to add in 13. You can also soften the effect, and I'm going to soften it just by 1. Typically, I will just soften it by 1. So it's really just the depth and the size that I like to play with in the structure box. And then in terms of the shading, you can change how the light is coming into your design. So that means by clicking on this area here, notice how by moving this around, we can get a different effect. So for my particular example, I'm just going to enter the values. I entered a value of 120 because that's my preferred angle of the light coming into my design. And then I'm also going to set this at 30. Like that. It was at 48, so it was kind of it was already kind of close to where I wanted it to be anyway, and it's still kind of harsh. So I'm going to click on the contour box, and you can kind of play around with the gloss of that.
I feel like this is a setting that loads of people neglect. Would you agree, Anna?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people almost don't explore it. They don't realize what it does or even that it's there in cases.
Yeah, it just basically allows you to add in better light into the mix. I mean, that's a simplified way of saying it. And so you can just boost it up a little bit and then click OK. And then I've left mine at screen. It's actually at screen 50, but I'm going to boost it up to 100. So notice when I increase this screen value, it makes the lights much brighter. So maybe 100 is too much, but 50 was too low. But it increases the contrast in the values between the lights and the darks, which instantly makes it more interesting. And then I always like to change the shadow to a color that I'm using in my work. I find black is very harsh. And in this particular design, we've got a lot of browns, we've got a little bit of blue going on, but a lot of neutrals going on. So I'm going to click on that box to activate my color picker and then just sample a color from my design. So I could go with a really dark brown, a much lighter, so kind of in the middle there would be perfect. If you want to manually do this, you just click around in that area. So quite often I will sample and then I will sort of go a little bit darker or lighter and then click OK. So, it just kind of softens that, how dark that black color is in your design. Quite often gray is also another good option. And again, you can play around with the opacity, and you can also change the color, the blending mode. At the moment, I've got multiply selected, but I also sometimes like to use linear burn. Notice how dark that becomes. And I also like to use color burn as well. So color burn sort of softens it a little bit.
Anna, I know we work in quite a similar way where it's basically cycle through blend modes on everything whether it's a layer or whether it's a setting, see what looks best by eye, and then do the same thing with opacitys and just play around.
Yes. And that's
like
really...
I never just default and I'm like, I try one thing and I'm like, done, because I know that by tweaking the dials, I end up with something better every single time.
Exactly. And then the more that you use blending modes, the more you kind of go, okay, I think that this and this and this one's going to work great in this case. Because notice I'm not going here and going, oh, let's try lighten or screen, because this is a darken blending mode. So they're going to be pretty much a waste of time. But if I go down to my darken blending modes, then I switched the wrong one, sorry. If I go down to my darken blending modes, we're going to get a lot more effect because we want the area to look darker, right? So I actually liked the color burn in this particular case. I thought it was quite good. It's got a little bit of interest in it. It sort of brings out some of the oranges in there. And then you just adjust the opacity to make it work for you. And then I just want to, it looks very angular at the moment. You can see that there's sort of a hard edge on this. So I'm going to click on this contour box. And if you open up these contour options, then you have different options available to you. And some of them are going to be worse and some of them are going to be better. And the ones that I tend to gravitate towards are these two here. So notice how that just softens up that curve just a little bit, or that sharp edge. And you might need to go back to your Bevel and Emboss, and you might have to maybe play around with the size a bit more. You can play around with the depth a bit more. You can adjust the color burn blending mode if you want to. Any of these blending modes, you might want to make it a bit brighter. So now that I've added that that different contour, then I feel like I can get away with a little bit more light on there. You could also go back up and just adjust the angle at the top here as well. So we've kind of got this, if you're a scrapbooker, this epoxy look that's happening, which is kind of fun, I think. And then I want to just add even more dimension. And so to do that, we're going to layer on the drop shadow on top of this Bevel and Emboss layer. Incidentally, if you want to save this particular style that you've created, you can click on this button here and go to new style. And I'm going to just type in some text. And you can see you can include the layer effects, you can include blending options, and then of course you want to add it to your library. So I'm going to click OK. And then if I go ahead and look down now at my styles, you can see that that style has now been deposited. So this style now I can apply to any other text element simply by clicking on that button. So if I go ahead and just, let's go ahead and click OK on this momentarily. And I'm going to type in another word. Let's go with, I've lost my results now, but anyway, it's okay. We'll go with glow because that's a good word. So I've got this glow. And then if I go ahead and just kind of roughly make it the same size and click on that, you can see we've now added that same style. Now it doesn't have the color because of course we don't have those clipped to the, we don't have these paper layers clipped to our text, but it gives you an idea of how you can save those styles and reuse them for later, for using again. So I'm not sure, there we go. So if I click on that, now I've applied that style. And if I go ahead and turn these off, then we get the same result. So you can use the papers to embellish. You can use the blending modes to change the color and the contrast of the colors of the papers or the elements that you have clipped to your word. And then you can also use the layer styles to add in dimension. I'm just going to double click on that Bevel and Emboss, and that's going to bring back up that layer style box. And now I'm going to click on that drop shadow effect, and we will kind of double click there to open up those values. And then here we want to just maybe increase the opacity to maybe around, I don't know, 40 or 50. I've got 48 here. I prefer linear burn as my preference for the drop shadow layer style. But of course, as Tom said previously, experiment with the other blending modes. I will sometimes use color burn. That can also be a really good option. You can change the angle. At the moment, because I have this global light box checked, then we are already getting the angle from what we've already sort of stated with this text layer. So it's the same angle. So I'm not going to change that. Typically I'd go with 120, but then that's going to change my my word art unless I uncheck this, of course. But I'm just going to go ahead and just leave it as is.
Anna, I may have mentioned this on a previous session. Do you want to know a very stupid confession of mine from back in the day?
Yeah, go.
We've all had these moments in Photoshop. So back in the day, I didn't actually understand the use global light option. And so I would apply a drop shadow somewhere in a piece. I would then try and apply a drop shadow elsewhere. I'd change the angle, and then it would change the angle on all the other drop shadows and effects across my entire piece. And it would drive me mad. And I was like, why is there no option to turn this off? Somehow I was blind to use global light.
Global light. Yeah, and it says it, doesn't it?
Oh, it says it. It makes complete sense. So rather than just look for that or Google it, for probably years, what I would do is I would apply a drop shadow or something, and then I would rasterize that layer so that when I changed it on another layer, it would remain as it is. And I look back and just shake my head at young Tom. I'm like, you idiot. It's right there in front of you. But I feel like we all have those moments in our Photoshop journeys.
I was going to say, I was right there with you. So for the longest time, I was like, why is it every time I apply a drop shadow, it's messing up my other drop shadows? It's so frustrating. So you just have to, you just have to uncheck that global light box. But in this case, there's not much difference between 120 and 105. So I'm just going with it. I'm leaving it. And plus, because we're applying this drop shadow to the same element, I kind of want it to have the same light as the other style. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to start having different lighting sources coming in on the same element, because it's going to look off then. So distance, again, is kind of personal preference. Depends on how much dimension you want. You can see I can pull it way off like this, which is for a really fun, unrealistic effect, or I can have it, just kind of a little bit off like that. So yeah, my typical go-to for an element of this kind of dimension is about 7 or 8. And the same with the size. I usually like the size to match the distance. I don't usually mess with the spread. I don't touch the quality. I just kind of use the blending mode, the opacity, the angle, the distance, and the size. And again, you can create a new style if you want to. So if you want to recreate that style, this is basically now the sun text plus shadow. Click OK, and now that you can see it just added it to my styles panel here. And so once I'm happy with that, I'm actually going to click OK this time, and it's going to apply that style onto there. So those are our 3 different word art effects. Now I'm going to just move on to playing with the embellishment, which is always the fun part. We're just going to jazz it up with some fun dimensional elements. So elements come in a couple of different ways in my art supplies. So we always have an elements folder within the ArtPlay palette, and you can see that we have all the different elements here. These are all delivered in PNG format. The elements that come within the folders, these are various different formats, because I have people using programs other than Photoshop and Elements that don't support PSD files. So by delivering these elements separately, then it allows my people to be able to use them in the different programs that they have available to you. So you have this one here, which is a simple drag and drop. You can layer these 2 together, where you have the leaf layer on top of the shadow layer. And so the real purpose of delivering these elements in this format is that I have added the shadows for you. So you don't even have to worry about the shadows. So I'm opening the PSD file, which again is a layered file. So now you see the shadow and you have the leaf, and they're on separate layers. And then the beauty of this is that when I add it to my design, and for some reason we've lost our, not sure what happened here, why we've lost our, there we go, bring it back.
You got it.
For some reason, it's been doing that. When I introduce something else, the layer style goes away. Anyway, we'll just re-add it at the end. I'm not sure why it's doing that. But anyway, the beauty of having this drop shadow on a separate layer is that you can then adjust how harsh you want that drop shadow to be. You can also change its placement by, if I use the arrow keys on my keyboard with that selected, or even just nudge it, you can see I can move that shadow around. And then, as I was saying earlier, I'm not such a huge fan of black necessarily. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll recolor it by going to Edit Fill. Let's go back to that brown color that we were using previously. And then you want to make sure you have the Preserve Transparency box checked, so it actually recolors the element and doesn't flood the layer with color, and then click OK. And it's just a very slight modification, but it sometimes helps. And again, I've got Multiply as my blending mode here, but maybe I want Linear Burn, maybe I want Color Burn. So that's kind of fun, that Color Burn option. So lots of different options to be able to play around with the different blending modes as well with these elements. And then the other elements that we have are these ones here. And so these don't have drop shadows applied to them. And that's because it's really not a case of adding a complex drop shadow. There's no cast to it or anything. You notice that the way this drop shadow has been applied, it makes it look like the leaf is lifted off the page. So these are much flatter. So if I just drag this on here using the Move tool and bring this up to the top, and then I can kind of just place that there, maybe just move a few things around here because this sunward art is maybe not as further down as I want it to be. So this is where we can start moving these pieces like they're pieces of a puzzle. And then once you've got it in position, then you can go ahead and add a drop shadow layer style. So go to Layer Style Drop Shadow. And we just added a drop shadow layer style to our sun element here. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that as is. There's the style with the drop shadow.
I really want a coffee now, Anna. But it's like nearly 5 p.m. here, so I probably shouldn't.
I would advise against it, but some people, they can drink coffee late at night. I am not one of those people.
I really can't. I start looking like Dakota, our golden retriever, where she lies on her side and she runs in her sleep. That's what I do when I try and go to bed after a coffee.
That is funny. That is funny. All right.
This is looking great, by the way. I just want to check in with everyone. Are you still following along okay? We've worked through quite a few stages of this composition. Again, I think it's been super clear, and that was the feedback when I checked in earlier. But how is everyone getting on? And let us know, are you following along? For everyone that has grabbed this bundle or has some of Anna's resources, have you been working along as you've been listening? Amy says, I love this. It's beautiful. I agree. Bill says, yeah, fantastic. Michelle, yes, following along fine. Good stuff.
Yeah, so the second source of my elements is usually in what I call multimedia elements. And so I have these multimedia birds. And again, I deliver these in, my newest sets, I've now started delivering each one of the elements in separate layers so that you have access to those, even if you're not using Adobe Photoshop. If you're working in Adobe Photoshop or Elements, and of course you would want to use the PSD files. And so I'm going to bring in two different elements here. And to do this, I'm going to hold down that Control or Command key on my keyboard and select those two files and then drag them into my workspace. And again, it's super important that you drag them into the background and not directly onto your canvas so that you have access to all the layers. So notice all of these layers so we can extract these individually. So one of the things that I want to do for my kind of what we call in the digital scrapbooking world a cluster is I want to add another element to this to kind of create a trio of elements and also to give the visual appearance of adhering this element to the page. So I'm going to select the Urban Stitches layer, and then that is going to allow me to access this independently. And then I can go ahead and I can sort of resize it and just place it kind of where I want it to go, really. It's a little big, so I definitely want to resize it like that. So I'm going to add that into the mix like that. So now we've got this fun little string that aligns with the stem of the leaf, and it provides a nice little trio for our element cluster. And then we're going to add a little cluster to the right here to add even more visual interest. So to do this, I can actually just drag this whole thing and use the whole thing if I want to, this whole element. I wanted to just select all of those layers and bring them in, but it's a bit much. There's a lot going on with that. So I'm going to kind of pare it down a little bit and sort of create our own little element. And so I just taught a class on this actually over at my website. So if you attended that class, you'll recognize some of this stuff, but it just kind of gives you a sneak peek. So there is, we have the bird. I can bring the bird in like this, but I don't particularly like that he is looking to the right. I want him to kind of look inward towards my other element. So to do this, I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and then I'm going to flip on a horizontal axis. And that is going to flip my bird around, and I can make him smaller. I can rotate him a little bit like that. And then I'm going to add the branch in. So we can maybe bring this branch into, I could have brought the branch and the bird in at the same time if I'd have been smart, but you know, we don't always know what we want to add into these until we've added them. So I actually kind of like that the way it is. And we want to bring that branch down so it looks like he's got a little perch to sit on. But I can also go to Edit, Transform, and flip horizontal as well. So if I want to have the branch coming in and maybe have it like that, that might be a better fit. And then just to add a little bit more interest, I'm going to bring in this orange flower from our other file that we brought in and select both the flower and the drop shadow layer. It's going to save me a ton of time not to have to add in a different drop shadow layer style if it's already done for me, and maybe add that behind. I can resize that. I can rotate it. If I really wanted to get fancy, I could go to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and I could play around with the color of it if I wanted to, make it a different color. So if I wanted it to be maybe more purple instead of orange, I could do that. And then lastly, I'm going to just introduce some photo glows. Photo glows are found in the photo glows category. There's a bunch of those actually at Design Cuts. And then you can also find them within the Multimedia Elements. And you're going to drag this into the mix. And these can be used to add color to your design. They can be used to add light. So if I bring in this white one in as well, you can add these into the mix. You can add sort of a sun flare, and you can resize them. You can go ahead and recolor them by using that same hue and saturation. So if I wanted to mirror that purple look, I'm kind of going off the path here, Tom. You'll notice it looks nothing like it did, but like I said, yeah.
I was enjoying the orange glow of that sun. It was warming
so I'll keep
me
it
up
orange
over
then.
here.
But it gives you an idea of you know, how you can kind of manipulate those. The other fun thing you can do is you can take this glow and you can go ahead and you can clip it to any of your elements. So if I want to clip it to, let me see if I can find here we go. If I wanted to clip it to this clipping set here, so, and have it just affect the word art below, then you can go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask, and you can see now that that glow sort of joins. This one doesn't actually make too much of a difference. But sometimes when you clip, let's clip it to the flower instead. I mean, the bird, and see if I can demonstrate that. There we go, Layer. So we can have the glow just colorize the bird as opposed to, and then just because Tom likes this, we'll just make sure we have it in the top here. And then, you know what, because we've added a really nice kind of sunny scene to this, I'm going to go ahead and grab, we have two choices here, just so that we're using all the products. We've got these suns, which I said we probably wouldn't use. Well, I think I lied. You can go ahead and you can drag in one of these suns and just kind of drag and drop it onto your design. And you might want to kind of reposition that if below that that sort of leaf element and kind of in front of the artsy transfer, and maybe go ahead and go edit fill with that preserve transparency box checked. We might want to lighten that again, not super into the whole black. We'll soften it by adding a brown. And so that's going to make it more yellow, and you can play with the opacity. You can play with the blending modes, add different blending modes. That's kind of fun, that linear dodge. Maybe bring the opacity down. And then if you wanted to use these brushes with the paintbrush tool, you can bring up your brushes panel by going to Window and Brushes. And you can see I've already loaded these in here, but it's really easy to add these brushes. You just go and you drag the ABR file, drag it into your Photoshop workspace, and drag it directly to the panel, and you'll see that it automatically now loads those brushes instead of having to click on the menu and go to import brushes. And then this allows you to select the paintbrush tool from the tools panel. Let's go ahead and select white as our color, or maybe pink, as the case may be. And we'll select a different brush this time, and we can just stamp with the new layer selected. We can stamp directly on there. And so now we have two suns. I don't know if we need two suns, but
I'll take all the sun we can get.
Yeah, let's just keep that. So anyway, so that is adding in the photo glows and the sun elements. And that pretty much completes my presentation. If I go back and, did I close down the original? Maybe I closed it down. I can bring in the original that I had pre-designed, and we can see how much it differs. Not too bad. Oh, I didn't add the birds.
I quite like the new one.
Yeah, it's more colorful, right?
Yeah.
So I added birds in, which obviously came from the multimedia birds here. So I just basically snagged this bird file and just laid it over the top of my design. So it's just basically lots of layering of elements to complete the effects.
Anna, incredible session as ever. I just want to say a massive thank you, and it's great to see the community enjoying it so much as well. So let's give it up for Anna in the chat, everyone. Really, really cool. Amazing. Well, so glad to see everyone loving this session. Tons of great feedback. So thank you everyone for joining us live today. Really glad that you enjoyed it. Once again, Anna, thank you.
Welcome.
Just tremendous as ever, and we'd love to welcome you back again in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to share my stuff.
Thank you, and enjoy your week off next week.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much. Thanks.
All right. Take care, my friend.